We're very lucky to have with us Klaudiusz Ślusarczyk today. Thank you very much for agreeing for the interview.
Thank you
Huge
for the
pleasure.
Invitation. Thank you.
I would like to start by asking you just a few words about yourself, about your background. Or a professional background.
Thank you. So I have been teaching at our school for about maybe over 12 years. I began teaching in the English department, or let's say the English studies department. And then when we opened up a new English path in the arts new media department, I was there at the beginning. So that's been since, I think over 6 or 7 years now. And here I'm in charge of a couple of aspects of the faculty. So one of them would be, naturally, the English learning, strictly connected to academic writing and research. And that's been, let's say, at the core at the beginning. And I also run a couple of different subjects which are connected to understanding art discourses. This is a subject which is called Language, Art and Making Meaning, which you have taken.
This is something we're going to talk about for sure.
So we can develop. And obviously, besides that, besides my academic work, I also, cooperate or work with my own artistic projects. Okay. Which are connected to new media, but not always. And in the future, we have the opportunity to also start a new subject, which is called Arden Robotics, which we'll probably discuss.
This sounds exciting. Yeah, I would love to ask more. You, at some point when we were talking before, you brought up that you have some background in theater. Can you tell a few words about that?
Well, I finished my formal education in Melbourne, in Australia, at Monash University, and I was majoring in theatre direction. This was in the performing arts department. And actually this was my area of interest for many years. When I came to Poland, I was working as part of a theatre company and then working on my own experimental projects. So we had a small group based here in Warsaw, and we were working with experimental theatre and actually adopting new technologies as I think about it now. But it was very much movement-based, text-based, incorporating certain elements of new technologies into the work.
I see where your passion for robotics and this kind of stuff comes from then. Well,
I'm not sure if it's a passion.
Okay.
But it's definitely an area of interest. Actually, robotics is it's a wide. It could be understood as a wide field.
I use too much of a strong word. What I mostly meant is you're interested in art, and you combining art and tech in this field.
Yes. Although I tend to work with new technologies also from a critical basis. So it's not that I'm, let's say, infatuated with new technologies. I tend to use it as a way to explore and possibly have a more critical stance. Critical not in a sense of being, a critic of new technologies, but looking at how it influences our, let's say, experience, our relationships to the world, etc.
With that, I would like to ask, we have this during our classes from time to time that you bring up us trying new ways of writing with, for example, the use of ChatGPT. How do you incorporate or try to incorporate new technologies or new ways to engage students into the educational process?
Well, what you mentioned with ChatGPT, which is, obviously it's the dawn of using AI. So one of the things that we've also discussed with our peers and our rest of the teachers is how to engage with, with AI technology in a more, let's say, controlled way. Okay, so that so that we don't work with it as a contradiction to the actions, but more how we can actually use it to help us. For example, as young researchers, as young students, how can we use, this technology to explore a particular subject?
Definitely.
Yeah, so
it's just that I would say that in a lot of ways, a lot of teachers are scared of students having access to that kind of technology because they can use it in malicious ways of teaching and other stuff. And it's very refreshing when you propose us to use it in a good way, and it's very encouraging to use it in a fair way.
Thank you, but this is a discussion that has been around for a few months at least within, let's say, academic research circles, and we're all finding our ways around this area. In the end, because we are at the beginning of how this technology actually works. Obviously we'll come to a point where we won't be able to distinguish, yes,
for sure,
whether a student is using, let's say, this AI generated texts completely, or are they using it as a way to kind of expand their own knowledge. So I think one of the things that when I personally had to think about this is maybe the focus should be on the individual and the student, and whether they really want to take this opportunity, particularly in this first formation of education, to learn how to do research, to develop their own ideas, etc. And I think if we start from that position, then ChatGPT will only be a tool. It's not going to replace the need to learn how to recognize the difference between different researchers or different ideas, etc. Yes. So in the end, I think it's going to be up to the individual student. I mean, maybe it's a utopian vision, yes, but we can't control everything.
We'll see how it's gonna go.
We'll see.
Things will change within a few years quite a lot, so it's for us to just observe how it's going to be changing. We went quite deep inside of the topic of academic writing. Could you expand and tell a bit more in general what the subject is about, the way that you conduct it?
Well, it's not only myself. We have a team of teachers. The basic premise of this academic writing module is really to teach students to move into a world of research and the possibility, or have the ability, to articulate other people's ideas and hopefully present their own conversation within those ideas. Okay, so because we teach within the English language, it already has some strict parameters in terms of the referencing style. But the ultimate goal is really to teach students so that they can articulate their own research and actually use that as a way to improve their own practical projects, artistic projects.
As one who's getting these classes myself, I can definitely say that it definitely has been helping me a lot and helping my relationship with writing a lot, because it's quite complex, especially in English, since a lot of people are coming from having English not as their native language and not having opportunity to write something more serious. It's been really, really great. Next subject that you mentioned earlier is the language
art and making
meaning, which before was just language and making meaning, and with the changes to the program, it's evolving. I'd like to know about the changes to the subject and what the subject is about.
Well, the little change of the, let's say, the title of the subject kind of underlines what the focus will be. So before it was language and making meaning, now it's going to be called language, art and making meaning. So it's going to focus on identifying different discourses within, let's say, the art world, whether it's historical or discourses that are more connected to understanding contemporary art and contexts. it always the subject itself begins with understanding language as a structure, but also seeing how language as a structure affects how we perceive within the visual field as well. Okay, so to links up those two ideas. So, you know, a way of making meaning of things, you know, in terms of being a recipient of an artwork, yes, and how we make that meaning, or how as artists we can create a path for a recipient of an artwork to somehow, you know, have this experience that maybe you want them to at least begin to understand within the art.
So in a way, the general idea is for students to be able to look at art and in general at whatever they see in the world from more artistic perspective, from more unique perspective?
Not necessarily from, well, we look at, you know, we look at the question, is an artist, let's say, meaning or artist vision the only meaning that an artwork can generate? And obviously it's possible that there is many meanings, yes, but what we actually learn, particularly in the first semester, is looking at different discourses from post-colonial thought, from new art history, from gender studies, how one particular art piece can be interpreted depending on the discourse that you, let's say, inject into it. So one of the things that I try to propose is that as recipients of art, it is in our, let's say, let's say it's in our responsibility, yes, to kind of widen our encyclopedia of knowledge so that we inject that onto the artwork, yes. In a way, it also teaches, you know, the students as young artists or designers, or as young future artists and designers, that they're able to have that encyclopedia of knowledge in their creative work. Yes, not as a way to explain their work, but I think it makes their work a lot more valuable.
It makes sense, and I would say that from what I gained from the classes is a very interesting and quite alternative way. In a way, the topics that we discuss during the classes are kind of like art history in a way, because we look at some constructs that are coming from past, but we're looking at them from, as you said, different perspectives. That's I think the value of what I find myself valuable from those classes, and I'm kind of interested how it's changing with the new path. But I guess future students would find out about it.
Well, obviously, you know, because the new, let's say, the new path, or let's say the new course, will shift its focus on, let's say, the influence of new technologies a lot more. So definitely this will also somehow influence my subject. So we'll be looking at different discourses from, you know, more contemporary sense, and how they help us understand, or, you know, ask the question, you know, even one of those questions that we haven't really asked during those classes is, you know, how do we deal with AI generated art? Yes, who is the, let's say, the owner of the meaning when it comes to that, etc.
This is the conversation that is so active these days because of the recent blow up of what AI technology can do with art. Yeah.
And I think it's connected, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's connected to a sense of threat that maybe
definitely
that is.
I feel like most of us feel threatened by possibilities in what's coming to future, because month and month we see improvements with what it can do. How, for example, it stupidly generates hands, but then it learns to generate 5 fingers instead of 10 on one hand. So it is terrifying for it a little bit, but I guess what we're also realizing that we can use it to help us, or we can try to ignore it if we hate the technology. I feel like for artists mainly the problem is how unfair in some situations the use of AI is for artists, because it bases a lot of art on incorrectly used. Nobody gave permission for the AI to develop, to generate images from. So this is the problem for artists, I would say.
Yeah, definitely the question of ownership has been an important question, yes, particularly also when we talk about music as well. But I think slowly all of these things are going to find their place. And I think one of the things that tends to hopefully will happen, I mean, is that the development of all of these new different directions are going to be within some kind of an ethical code that will be developed before it explodes. Yes, so we'll see. I mean, it's an interesting time. Yes,
yes, for sure.
It's nice to be alive.
Yes.
Okay.
And last subject that you brought up is Arden Robotics.
Arden Robotics, which we're going to introduce from the beginning of next semester. From next year, because it's a second year subject, so it will be available in 2025. The subject in itself is interesting because we want to introduce something new, and that is to create a subject which is available both for our arts and media students and the IT students. So they will both be able to choose this as an elective.
Sounds really exciting.
Which means that it's a subject that will be available in different departments. And I mean, one of the dreams that I've always had is because of my own personal cooperation with IT engineers within the school or outside of the school. And I find that really fruitful and very inspirational, is to basically have a subject where IT students who are interested in robotics can work together with our students who want to develop their ideas creatively, but maybe they don't have the tools or the knowledge on the engineering skills to work together on a project. So it's going to be a very practical project where, you know, within that module, students will be able to cooperate on their single project. So
it is very exciting because the topic of collaboration between different faculties has been in various areas, including games, for example, where IT and graphic design would be really good together. So it is exciting to see something like this coming up to reality.
Yeah. I mean, it will be the first time, so we'll definitely see how it works, but I'm also excited to have this. So so maybe when we have the interview in a couple of years, we'll be able to reflect.
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Looking at especially the subject language, art and making meaning, there are quite complex topics that need to be broken down for students. So how do you make these very, very complicated and layered subjects easier for students to understand? Do you have a specific method of how you engage students into this?
I don't know if I can call it a method. I mean, I think the starting point is that you share something that interests you as well as a teacher. Okay, and I think students have a sense of picking up on this, and then obviously finding an interesting way to deliver these topics that are sometimes complex, sometimes less so. I like the idea of giving small tasks, yes, that allow me to see whether the students understand the subject matter. Okay, so usually as part of this module, each week they do a small task, a small creative task, where, I mean, for example, when we're looking at visual structures and how structure or the way that a piece of art is structured can somehow help for the meaning to be, you know, articulated. There is an exercise we work with Nan Golding's photographs, and the students are asked to, within the choice of these 12 photographs, to think of a way to display them
in the museum space, right?
Well, museum space, it could be a virtual space, it could be any space, but with an idea that the way that these works are displayed in terms of the size, in terms of scale, in terms of the proximity, in terms of, let's say, the choices, let's say, or whether it is going to be reading the work from left to right, etc. So all of these are important choices, and whether, let's say, the idea of what they want to present for this work is supported through the structure. Okay, so this is an example of a little task that they do, and it's really interesting to see because they're all working with the same set of photographs, and they're able to really develop different maybe narratives or different stories through this.
I believe that from year to year you've been seeing a lot of very different, unique ideas in that exercise. We had it. I remember. Yeah, it was a very fun one. Yeah. Talking about you and your personal work, do you have anything going on with your work that you would like to talk about a little bit? Tell us.
Well, I'm in the process of finishing up my doctorate work, which is also takes into consideration creating of an installation. So that's something that I'm engaged in quite a lot at the moment, and I have a couple of people helping me. Yes, one of the students also. So it's great to incorporate their knowledge into their work. I don't want to go too much into this project before it's shown, but basically it's looking at an artistic response to something that I have been researching for quite a while, and that is the influence of the digital experiences in how we relate to each other, in how we relate to the world, in how we have a sense of self, etc. So one of the points of interest was how does this feeling of being watched, or let's say new surveillance or super panopticon surveillance systems, how they really orchestrate our sense of self and how we relate to each other. So as part of that research, it's a way to look into these aspects, into these different discourses, and kind of setting them aside and allowing, a creative response to come through that, which is generally the way that I work. Okay, so one could say that it's a theory to practice type of an approach, but I try to use the theory as a way to expand this idea of encyclopedia of knowledge. But it's not that I find a figurative response to this. I also have this moment where I just allow, let's say, the creative ideas to come through, and somehow they are infiltrated or they are influenced by some of that research that I have done. It's never an idea that I want to illustrate, let's say, a theoretical topic and then create a response to it. That was a bit of a secret that I just told you.
Well, I would like to say that I guess whenever we see that project, and we will see it eventually, it's really, really interesting how it's all going to come together. I mean, we know a bit more as we're right in the studio, but I guess people who watch have to wait to see sometime.
Well, if they watch this carefully, they might see part of it somewhere.
Yes, that's true. Lastly, I would like to ask you, we were discussing how students learn from your subjects, how they learn about how to write, how to look at art. And with that, I would like to ask about you and how you, in your career teaching young students with time, how has it been changing and what have you been noticing and, well, what have you been adapting to with newer students and your generation of people coming up?
It's an interesting question. Because I have been teaching for over a decade now. It seems like a long time, particularly, I'm sure, for young students. I guess the biggest change that has come through And it does change from year to year, so that it's not like there is a steady progression. Sometimes you have, this kind of a parabola effect, that some year levels tend to have a different approach than others. The general trend that I have seen, which is very positive, I think, is that young people are a lot more, I think they're a lot more confident in being able to articulate what their beliefs are, which is very, very, I think, very important. I think there's a lot more freedom in terms of, the general lifestyle. We're really seeing how, 10 years ago, in the way that people felt in terms of their identity, in terms of their beliefs, etc., how these are so much more open. Even though we're living in Poland, which tends to be a more conservative country, you're still seeing within our university how this has changed. So that's like an overall look. Maybe on a more worrying side, I think the way that people engage with difficult material has changed. So, for example, I don't think students have the patience to read things they don't understand. And I think one of the things that I've had to change a little bit is to modify the readings of the texts that the students receive as a way for them to at least get a sense of parts of something that I feel are important to know. But when I look at my educational, where I finished at Monash University, where it was really heavily text-based, even though we were in theatre studies and also in very creative fields, we were reading a lot of material, really a lot of material, which I believe is something that's not as present in today's education. So I'm one of those teachers that maybe some students don't like because I do give them text to read. But I believe it's important.
I guess, especially considering we all have to finish up by writing thesis, it is essential. And as much as it might be complicated, we cannot get rid of it. So it is important.
It's important, but I think it's more important in this idea of shaping and shaping your idea of how someone articulates their thought and how different authors are able to articulate their thought. And that, in that way, you're also teaching yourself how you can somehow explain something that is not within, one sentence or like an Instagram post in a way, yes? That maybe you need to have an elaboration on a topic in order to really understand it.
That makes sense. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for answering all of the questions. It's been a huge pleasure. Thank you for doing for that.
Thank you as well. Thank you so much.